Prologue. Alpha King Lorcan. Ashbourne had not laughed in 2 years. This was not a metaphor or an exaggeration. It was a clinical fact that his physician, Dr. Astrid Lindqvist, had noted in his file, with the particular concern of a medical professional watching a patient slowly turn to stone. The king functioned. He governed efficiently, negotiated brilliantly, maintained his territories with the mechanical precision of a man running a well-designed machine. But he did not laugh. He did not smile except when diplomacy required it, and those smiles were so obviously manufactured that his own guards could identify them as fake from across a room. He existed inside a shell of duty so thick that the man beneath it had become theoretical, someone the kingdom remembered, but no longer actually encountered. The reason was grief he refused to name. His father had died 2 years ago. Not suddenly, not tragically, but slowly, from an illness that had given Lorcan 14 months of watching the strongest man he knew dissolve into someone who could not remember his own son's name. Lorcan had held his father's hand through every stage of decline, managed a kingdom simultaneously, and when the old king finally died, Lorcan had simply continued managing. He had not stopped to grieve, had not taken a day off, had not allowed himself a single moment of weakness because the kingdom needed a king, not a son mourning his father. So he had sealed the grief inside the shell alongside the laughter and the smiling and every other human impulse that might crack the surface and let the sorrow flood through. On this particular October morning, Lorcan was riding alone through the Ashbourne Valley. His security detail, led by the perpetually worried Commander Rafael Mendoza, had been instructed to maintain a half-mile distance because the king occasionally needed to breathe without someone watching him do it. He was following the creek that wound through the lower valley, a route he had ridden with his father as a boy, when he heard a sound that stopped his horse mid-step. Laughter. Not polite laughter, not social laughter, not the controlled, appropriate laughter that echoed through his council chambers when someone made a carefully calibrated joke. This was wild, gasping, full-bodied laughter. The kind that comes from the gut and takes over the entire body. The kind that suggests the person producing it has lost all control of themselves and is delighted about it. The kind of laughter that Lorcan had not heard, from anyone, including himself, in so long that the sound of it felt almost foreign, like a word from a language he used to speak. He followed the sound through the trees to a bend in the creek where the bank dropped steeply into a wide mud flat. And there, in the middle of the mud, was a woman. She was stuck. Genuinely, thoroughly, catastrophically stuck. Both boots sunk past the ankles in thick creek mud that had apparently seized her mid-crossing and was now holding her with the determination of a material that had found its purpose. She was covered in mud from the waist down. Her hair, which appeared to be dark and curly, had leaves in it. She was holding what looked like a specimen jar above her head, with one hand to keep it out of the mud, and with the other hand, she was trying to pull her left boot free, which only succeeded in sinking her right foot deeper, which was apparently the funniest thing that had ever happened to anyone, because she was laughing so hard she could barely stand. "Oh, no!" she gasped between howls of laughter. "Oh, no, 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 that is worse. That is so much worse." She yanked her left foot again. The right foot sank another 2 inches. She looked down at her situation, assessed it with the clarity of someone who understood she was not in danger, but was in maximum inconvenience, and laughed even harder. "My boots," she wheezed to nobody. "My beautiful boots. They are gone. They belong to the creek now. This is how it ends. Death by mud. They will find my skeleton holding a jar of watercress samples, and the coroner will say she died as she lived, too stubborn to let go of the specimen." Lorcan sat on his horse at the top of the bank and watched a mud-covered woman negotiate with a creek bed, while laughing so hard she could barely breathe, and something inside his chest, something that had been sealed for 2 years beneath layers of duty and grief and mechanical precision, cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way ice cracks when the temperature shifts just enough, a sound too small for anyone else to hear, but seismic for the landscape it ran through. He did not know her name. Did not know why she was in a creek collecting watercress specimens. Did not know anything about her except that she was stuck in mud and laughing about it with the full-throated joy of someone who refused to experience inconvenience as tragedy. And sitting on that horse, Watching a stranger laugh at her own absurdity, Alpha King Lorcan Ashbourne fell in love for the first and only time in his life, before he even pulled her free. The Alpha King found her stuck in creek mud, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. He had not laughed in 2 years. He fell in love before he climbed off his horse, because her joy was the first real thing he had encountered since his world turned to stone. Chapter 1. My name is Juniper Alcantara. People call me June. I was 29 years old, Omega, and the most undignified botanist in the Ashbourne Valley, a title I had earned through years of falling into ditches, getting tangled in brambles, being chased by geese, and now, apparently, being swallowed by a creek bed while collecting watercress specimens for a study on the medicinal properties of local aquatic plants. I was also, at this particular moment, laughing so hard that I had abandoned any hope of freeing myself through physical effort, and was simply waiting for the mud to either release me or claim me permanently. I should explain why I was laughing instead of panicking. The short answer is that I had been in this exact type of situation approximately 40 times in my career as a field botanist, and had learned that the choice between laughing and crying at your own absurdity is the choice between someone who enjoys their life and someone who does not. The long answer involved my grandmother Esperanza, who had been a botanist in Seville before she came to England, and who had taught me 2 essential lessons. First, that every plant has a purpose, even if humans have not discovered it yet. And second, that a woman who cannot laugh at herself while covered in mud has no business working with nature, because nature will humble you daily, and you might as well enjoy it. I heard the horse before I saw the rider. The soft thud of hooves on the bank above me, followed by a silence that I interpreted as someone deciding whether to help or watch. "Are you all right?" a male voice called down. It was a deep voice, careful and controlled, with the particular restraint of someone who was used to measuring every word before releasing it. "That depends," I called back, still laughing. "Define all right. Are you in danger?" "Absolutely not. I am in mud." These are different situations with very different urgency levels. I heard what might have been a short exhale of amusement. "Might have been. Would you like help?" "I would like my boots back," I said. "But the creek has claimed them as tribute, and I respect its authority. So yes, help would be appreciated, if you do not mind getting muddy. I should warn you that the mud is aggressive. It has opinions, and it is winning." He appeared at the top of the bank, tall, dark-haired, wearing riding clothes that were far too nice for creek rescue operations. He was handsome in the way that mountains are handsome, imposing, slightly severe, the kind of face that suggested its owner had not relaxed since approximately birth. He looked at me, mud-covered, leaf-haired, still giggling, holding a specimen jar above my head like a very dirty Statue of Liberty, and his expression did something complicated. The controlled blankness of his face shifted, twitched, rearranged itself, and for a fraction of a second I saw something underneath that looked like a smile trying to escape from a very well-guarded prison. He climbed down the bank, removed his own boots and rolled his trousers to the knee with the methodical precision of a man who approached mud the way most people approached military operations, and waded in. The mud grabbed him immediately. I saw him register the suction with the quiet alarm of someone who had underestimated their opponent. "Told you," I said. "It has opinions." He reached me, assessed the situation, and extended both hands. "Take my hands. Let go of the jar." "I cannot let go of the jar," I said. "These are watercress specimens from the upper creek bed. They are the first documented samples of this variant in the Ashbourne watershed. They are more important than my boots, and possibly more important than my dignity, which is already a lost cause." He stared at me. Then, and this was the moment I knew something extraordinary was happening, the corners of his mouth moved. Not a smile? Not yet. But the precursor to a smile. The geological shift that precedes an earthquake. "You are prioritizing watercress over footwear," he said. "I am prioritizing science over comfort," I corrected. "There is a difference." He made a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh, caught himself, and then, as if something inside him had decided that catching himself was no longer worth the effort, let it go. He laughed. A real, startled, involuntary laugh that sounded rusty from disuse but genuine in a way that made his entire face transform from mountain to meadow. And I stood in the mud holding my specimen jar, covered in creek bed from the waist down, and thought, whoever this man is, that laugh has not been used in a very long time. And I want to hear it again. He waded into the mud in riding clothes that cost more than my annual research budget, reached for my hands, and laughed for what sounded like the first time in years. I did not know he was a king. I just knew his laugh needed exercise, and I was exactly the kind of disaster who could provide it. Chapter 2. He pulled me free. It required significant effort, 2 failed attempts, and 1 moment where the mud nearly claimed him too, which produced his second laugh of the day. A surprised, undignified sound that seemed to shock him more than the mud did. My boots remained behind as permanent casualties. I stood on the creek bank in my stockings, muddy to the hips, triumphantly holding my specimen jar, while this stranger stood beside me in ruined riding clothes, looking like a man who had just experienced something he could not categorize. I should probably introduce myself, I said, since you have now seen me at my absolute worst, and we might as well be honest with each other. I am Juniper Alcantara. June. I am a botanist. I study medicinal plants in the Ashbourne watershed. And I apologize for your trousers. He looked down at his mud-covered legs with an expression of mild bewilderment, as if he had forgotten he owned legs. Lorcan, he said. I ride through this valley sometimes. I did not ask what he did for a living because, honestly, I was more interested in getting my specimens back to my laboratory before they degraded. But he walked with me. Bootless, muddy, carrying the specimen jar I finally surrendered to him because my arms were tired. The 2 miles back to my cottage, and we talked the entire way about watercress. Not just watercress. About the entire Ashbourne ecosystem, which I had been studying for 3 years under a research grant from the Royal Botanical Society. About the medicinal properties of plants that grew in English creek beds, and how traditional herbalism aligned with modern chemistry in ways that most people did not appreciate. About my grandmother Esperanza, who had catalogued 300 previously undocumented plant species in Andalusia before anyone took female botanists seriously. I talked too much. I always talked too much when I was excited, and this man was listening with an intensity that made me feel like the most interesting person on earth, which was a dangerous catalyst for someone with my verbal output. When we reached my cottage, a small, cluttered, plant-covered disaster of a home that looked like a greenhouse had eaten a house, he looked at it and said, "This is where you live?" "Yes, it has more plants than furniture. I see that." "Are those ferns growing out of the chimney?" "Those are research specimens. They are growing out of the chimney. They outgrew their pots. The chimney gets good light." "Reasonable." He said it without sarcasm, with the genuine acceptance of a man encountering a completely foreign lifestyle and deciding to engage with it on its own terms rather than judging it by his. I liked him for that. I liked him for the way he had carried my specimen jar without asking why it mattered, for the way he had laughed in the mud like a man remembering how, for the way he was standing on my doorstep in ruined clothes looking at my fern chimney with curiosity rather than horror. "Would you like tea?" I asked. "Before you head back." He looked at his mud-covered legs, at my mud-covered everything, at the cottage spilling plants from every surface. "Tea would be excellent," he said. "And perhaps you could tell me more about the watercress." No one has ever made watercress sound this interesting before. He carried my specimens for 2 miles, looked at ferns growing from my chimney without judgment, and stayed for tea because no one had ever made watercress sound interesting before. I did not know I was entertaining a king. I just knew he listened like my words mattered. Chapter 3. Lorcan came back the next week, and the week after. He appeared at the creek where we had met, riding the same horse, wearing clothes that were slightly more practical than the first time, carrying a thermos of tea because he had learned I forgot to eat when I was working, and thought hot beverages were a reasonable intervention. He followed me through the watershed while I collected specimens, holding jars and bags, and the occasional reluctant plant that did not want to be catalogued, listening to me narrate the ecological significance of everything we passed with the patience of someone who found enthusiasm itself more interesting than its subject. Over 4 weeks, I learned things about him in the way you learn things about quiet people, through fragments, observations, and the spaces between what they say. He was in his late 30s. He lived locally, which I assumed meant one of the large estates in the Upper Valley. He was educated, His questions about my research were sharp, specific, and revealed a mind that processed complex information quickly. He was sad, not performatively sad, not obviously broken, just carrying something heavy beneath the composed surface, the way a river carries stones you cannot see from the bank. I asked him about it on the 4th visit. We were sitting on the creek bank eating sandwiches, mine assembled chaotically because I cooked the way I did everything, with enthusiasm rather than precision, when I said, "You carry something heavy, Lorcan. I can see it in how you hold your shoulders. What is it?" He stopped chewing. Most people did not ask Lorcan personal questions, I would learn later. Most people were too intimidated, too calculating, too invested in maintaining distance. But I had pulled him from creek mud on our first meeting, and was therefore operating from a baseline of zero dignity, which made directness feel natural. "My father died 2 years ago," he said. "It was a long illness. By the end, he did not know who I was. I held his hand for 14 months and watched him disappear. And when he was gone, He paused, looking at the creek. I sealed it away. I did not grieve. I just continued working. And somewhere in the not grieving, I stopped being able to feel anything at all. Not just sadness. Everything. Joy, humor, warmth. All of it went behind a wall, and I've not been able to reach it since. Until..." He stopped. "Until what?" He looked at me. "Until 4 weeks ago, when I heard a woman laughing in creek mud like it was the funniest thing in the world. And something inside me cracked. The wall that had been holding everything back developed a fracture, because your laugh was so genuine, so unapologetically alive, that my body remembered what joy sounded like before I sealed it away. I set down my sandwich. "Lorcan," I said, "grief is not supposed to be sealed away. It is supposed to be felt. Loudly, messily, inconveniently, like getting stuck in mud. You do not solve grief by stepping around it. You solve it by wading in, getting dirty, and eventually finding solid ground again." He looked at me with those careful green eyes. "Are you comparing my grief to creek mud?" "I am comparing your grief to a natural process that is uncomfortable, but necessary, and significantly less scary, if you have someone to laugh with while you are in it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Will you be that person? The one I laugh with?" I do not know how to start laughing again by myself. I bumped his shoulder with mine. "You have already started. The mud laugh was a good one. We just need to build from there. I recommend more creek visits, less isolation, and at least one undignified incident per week to keep the practice going." He smiled, the 3rd real smile I had counted. "I can commit to undignified incidents," he said. "You seem to generate them naturally. I will simply stand nearby and participate. It is the most appealing schedule anyone has ever proposed to me." He told me about his father and the 2 years of sealed grief. I told him that grief was like creek mud. You solve it by wading in, not stepping around it. He asked me to be the person he laughed with. I said yes, and prescribed one undignified incident per week. Chapter 4. I learned Lorcan was the king on the 6th week, when Commander Rafael Mendoza appeared at my cottage door looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 hours. "Ma'am," he said with the controlled desperation of someone whose job was to protect a king who kept disappearing into a watershed with a botanist, "I need to speak with you about the nature of your relationship with the gentleman who has been visiting you." "His name is Lorcan," I said. "He helps me carry specimens and he is learning to identify fern varieties." "Is that a security concern?" "The gentleman," Mendoza said carefully, "is Alpha King Lorcan Ashbourne, ruler of the Ashbourne territories. My employer and the man I am supposed to be keeping alive, which is significantly harder when he vanishes into creek beds without his security detail every Tuesday." I sat down on my doorstep. The king. The man who had waded into mud in his riding clothes and laughed like it was the first time was the king. The man who had carried my watercress specimens and listened to me talk about plant ecosystems for hours was the ruler of every acre of land I was studying. I should have been angry about the deception, but I thought about the wall he described, the sealed grief, the 2 years without laughter, and I understood why a man carrying that weight might need somewhere he could just be Lorcan, somewhere without the crown, the council, the expectations, Somewhere he could wade into mud and laugh without someone filing a report about it. "Does he know you are telling me?" I asked Mendoza. "He instructed me not to," Mendoza admitted. "But I am overriding that instruction because I believe you should make informed decisions about the person you are." He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Rehabilitating." "Rehabilitating?" "His physician says he has smiled more in 6 weeks than in 2 years. His counsel reports that he is more engaged, more present, more human. Whatever you are doing in that creek, it is working. And I think you deserve to know who you are doing it for. Please do not tell him I told you. I will kill him myself if he fires me." I did not tell Lorcan that I knew. Not immediately. I gave myself a week to process, to decide whether the identity changed anything fundamental. It did not. The man who carried my specimen jars was the same man whether he wore a crown or creek mud. But I did make one change. The following Tuesday, when he arrived at the creek, I handed him a pair of proper Wellington boots. "If you are going to keep wading into mud," I said, "you should dress for it." He looked at the boots, sturdy, practical, deeply undignified. "These are not exactly royal footwear," he observed. "They are creek footwear," I corrected, "and in my creek everyone wears them, including kings who think I do not know they are kings." He went still. "You know, since last week, Commander Mendoza, because he loves you, and also because he is terrified you will die in a creek on his watch." Lorcan closed his eyes. "I am going to demote him. Please do not." He was right to tell me. And for what it is worth, I held out the boots. "It changes nothing. You are still the man who laughed in the mud. That is the person I care about. The crown is just an accessory." He took the boots, put them on, and waded into the creek beside me with the expression of a man who had been seen completely and had not been rejected for any part of what was visible. That, I would learn, was what he needed most. Not someone who was impressed by the king, someone who liked Lorcan. Muddy, grieving, slowly laughing again Lorcan. The Wellington boots fit perfectly. I gave a king Wellington boots and told him the crown was an accessory. He put them on and waded into the creek. Because what he needed was not someone impressed by royalty. He needed someone who liked the man underneath. The muddy, grieving, slowly learning to laugh again man. Chapter 5. The council did not approve. Lady Margot Pemberton summarized the objections. "She is a commoner, a botanist. She lives in a cottage with ferns growing from the chimney, and you met her because she was stuck in mud." Lorcan listened, then said, "She made me laugh. I have not laughed in 2 years. June fixed it by being stuck in mud and laughing about it. If that is not a foundation for a partnership, I do not know what is." The real resistance came from Lord Desmond Ashbourne, Lorcan's uncle, who had been exploiting Lorcan's grief to advance his own interests. A happy, laughing king threatened Desmond's strategy. So Desmond launched a campaign against me, whispers about my eccentricity, social sabotage at dinners, leaked articles calling me the Creek Mud Woman. I handled it the way I handled every obstacle, with practical humor. When society columns mocked me, I sent thank you notes for the publicity. When Desmond arranged hostile seating at dinners, I charmed the table discussing medicinal plants until they forgot they were supposed to be cruel. Lorcan watched and told me, "You fight the way plants do. Slowly, persistently, by growing toward the light." I told him, "I am a very stubborn fern." He laughed, the highest laugh count in 2 years. His uncle tried to shade me out. I grew toward the light anyway, because the light always wins. It just takes a stubborn fern to prove it. Chapter 6. Lorcan told me he loved me while we were both knee-deep in creek water. I was collecting specimens of a rare aquatic fern when he said without preamble, "I love you, June. I love that you talk about ferns like they are the most important thing in the world. I love that your cottage has plants growing from the chimney. I love that you were stuck in mud laughing when any reasonable person would have been miserable. I love your joy, your ridiculous, stubborn, mud-covered joy. It saved me. I stood in the creek with amber autumn light on my face and said, I love you too. I love that you carried my watercress jar before you knew my name. I love that you learned 37 species of fern because I talked too much and you actually listened. I love that you laugh now, not perfectly, but genuinely, and that every laugh sounds like a door opening in a house that was shut too long. He kissed me in the creek. The specimen jar fell in the water. We laughed through the entire kiss. Commander Mendoza texted Dr. Lindqvist, "They are kissing in the creek. Laugh count, 7. New record." Dr. Lindqvist replied, prescribing continued exposure to the botanist, indefinitely. He told me he loved me in a creek. I dropped a fern. We kissed in the water and laughed through it. Messy and wet and perfect. Exactly like us. Chapter 7. Desmond's campaign ended when Commander Mendoza presented evidence that his uncle had been exploiting Lorcan's grief to redirect government contracts to his own interests for 2 years. Lorcan removed him with decisive efficiency. Then he proposed at my cottage with a ring containing a pressed watercress specimen sealed in resin from the creek the day we met. "I found this caught in the mud near where you were stuck," he said. "It was the first beautiful thing I noticed after 2 years of noticing nothing. Will you marry me, June?" I examined the ring. "Nasturtium officinale," I said. "Common watercress. Medicinal properties include—" He kissed me before I could finish the classification. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes to the marriage and a strong objection to being interrupted during species identification." He laughed, the 37th laugh I had counted. Each one a small revolution. Each one proof that joy, once cracked open, does not close again. It just grows, like a stubborn chimney-climbing fern. He proposed with watercress in resin. I tried to classify it mid-proposal. He kissed me before I finished, our entire relationship in miniature. Chapter 8. We married beside the creek in October, 1 year after the mud. I wore boots under my dress. He wore Wellingtons beneath his coat because I told him it was traditional. My vows: you found me stuck in mud, and instead of walking away, you waded in. That is love, wading into someone else's mess and discovering the laughter lives there. I promise to keep dragging you into creeks and keep being the most undignified thing in your dignified life, because dignity is overrated and joy is not. His vows: you did not fix me. You were just so relentlessly alive that my own aliveness could not stay dormant anymore. You woke me up by being stuck in mud and talking about watercress. I promise to wade into every mud flat you find yourself in, carry every specimen jar, and laugh every day as loudly as I can, because you taught me that laughter is not frivolous. It is the sound of a person who is fully alive, and I intend to be fully alive for the rest of my life, with you. We married in Wellington boots beside a creek, because love built in mud is love built to last. Epilogue 5 years later. Our twins Esperanza and Oishin were raised in the creek, the cottage, and the mud. Dr. Lindqvist closed Lorcan's file. Joy sustained. Grief processed. Recommend continued exposure to the botanist indefinitely. The watercress I collected that day turned out to have significant medicinal properties, anti-inflammatory compounds used in clinics across the territory. The specimen jar sat on our shelf beside the pressed watercress ring. One foggy October morning, 5 years from the day we met, I went back to the creek. Lorcan found me there, because he still rode the valley when the world felt heavy. "Be careful," he said. "Last time you were in that mud, it changed my entire life." "I might fall in again," I warned. "Then I will wade in after you," he said. "Same as always." We stood beside the creek where joy had rescued grief, where laughter had cracked a wall, where a king fell in love with a woman covered in mud who did not care. And the ferns on the bank were growing stubbornly toward whatever light they could find, which is all any of us are really doing. The Alpha King found her stuck in creek mud, laughing hard. He fell in love before he pulled her free. 5 years later, they stood beside the same creek, fully alive, because joy is not frivolous. It is the sound of a person who refuses to let grief have the last word, and laughter like ferns, grows toward the light. Always.